and withholding exculpatory information,
Right.
the use of snitches for commutation of sentences, withholding evidence. It's just one thing, a horrible shit defense, everything about it. And it's really what it reveals is that it's finally about poverty. It's about class.
We hear a lot about it being about race, and often the problem with the system
Well, sometimes
is
race,
or
sometimes
appears
race
to be
and
about
poverty
race.
are aligned.
But the best thing among the many great things in this is the conversation that takes place cell to cell, Todd to his neighbor, where the neighbor says, with regard to capital punishment, if you don't have the capital, you get the punishment.
Well, the funny thing, I worried a bit that could be the author's voice a little bit, except that I met guys who were that articulate and that aware of their circumstances.
Right.
And they had come to that
That
understanding.
the inadequacy of resources, whether in the person of an attorney who can adequately defend you in a case like that, or the inadequacy of resources to be able to make your case or have your case made. Either way, if you don't have the capital, you get the punishment.
That's right.
Right. The second thing that strikes me again is that he was not a sympathetic figure.
Right.
He becomes more sympathetic as the film goes on, but the reality is he is a bad guy. But the fact that you are a bad guy doesn't mean you are guilty of this thing.
Well, I'll admit that was certainly part of the allure. I felt if he had been such an innocent character, I think it would have possibly bordered on sentimentality. I think to force the audience to come to this conclusion with this character makes it a much more challenging tale, but I think a much more important one.
In some ways, it's harder to believe that a bad person is innocent than a good person is innocent, right?
Right.
Whether it makes for a better film or a worse film, the facts are the facts. And while this is billed as a fact-based drama, meaning it's a very long story, it's a very complicated story, you're telling it in 2 hours and 7 minutes.
Right.
By necessity, some things will be compressed, some things will be left out. You're making editorial decisions. The reality of the telling of his story is accurate as far as he is a bad person.
Yes, but it's also accurate as to the facts. In other words, obviously there is dramatic license in the internal understanding of the characters and various motivations, but I think not to really have your facts in order is to risk something very irresponsible, because for better or worse, this becomes the permanent record.
Right.
And a story has to have within it a certain narrative integrity for it to work without bowdlerizing the facts.
Yeah.
And this had it. It was just implicit.
And for those of us who saw the story play out in real time, it is the story that we saw. And yet, I had no idea of the existence of Elizabeth Gilbert.
Yeah, right. Well, that's
I had no recollection of it or no knowledge of it. And of course, the first thing I did was go, wait a minute, this is not Eat, Pray, Love Elizabeth Gilbert. No, it's a different Elizabeth Gilbert. But that Elizabeth Gilbert did exist. She did come to the case exactly in the kind of accidental way that she did. Texas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. She makes the connection. She becomes the pen. It's the story.
Yeah, and I think without Elizabeth, I wouldn't have really understood the story, because, first of all, she gave me all of her letters and Todd's letters, and the insight into him and what his particular odyssey was. And it also allowed the story to have flesh and blood. It wasn't just an objectified experience. It was very subjective, meaning his experience, and to have a window into that, and to try at least to have a window into that was very important to me.
Right, and the crash at the end, which is this moment that seems to come out of nowhere, and if you're not expecting it, it's very jarring, but it's also very poignant because he's expecting her to come.
Yeah.
She doesn't come, and it's sort of the last indignity that he feels like he...
And yet it also has this remarkable, very antithetical quality, which is the fact that she believes, Liz does, that what she learned from Todd and their experience has enabled her to bear her burden now, which is not dissimilar in terms of what he had to deal with.
And because it's a Texas story, as with all Texas stories, you decided to end with Governor Perry.
Well, somebody had to do it. Really, someone has to be accountable, and it was called death by facts. The parole board decided not to meet. They just arbitrarily passed it by.
Well, I can tell you in the modern history of Texas, the execution of criminal justice, he is by no means, and this is by no means the only example.
I'm sure not. And by the way, let me say one more thing, which is, obviously it's him, but when I see those guys standing up there, I don't only see him. I see Mitch McConnell, I see, I see Donald Trump. I see people, Donald Trump, who put a, well, he took out a full-page ad about the Central Park Five when they were caught before they were tried and proven innocent, in which he claimed that they should be put to death.
But of course, the inverse, Ed, as you know, is that right now we're in a moment in this country where criminal justice reform is the rare bipartisan issue, where the left and the right both believe that the system is broken. We've kind of come back around to a place where there's actually, weirdly, common ground on reforming the system, top down, not just the death penalty, but sentencing reform, mandatory minimums, and all the, raising a lot of different aspects of this system.
Well, it'll be interesting when it gets to the electoral debates, if there are such a thing, that all of the Democratic candidates have indeed now sort of signed on to what Governor Newsom talked about in terms of calling for a moratorium. Will that become something that's actually argued and within a forum like that?
Is this therefore in that respect a political film, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are those who would say that all film is political. I think anytime you put two images together, you're doing something.
Did you
political.
do this intending to make a political film, or did you make a film that ended up by virtue of the subject matter being political? What was your intent?
I think that, I've never thought of it as a bifurcated question. I think that I think I might have thought that I was making a movie that was born of the kind of banked rage that I was feeling. I think ultimately I made a movie that was interesting to me as much about a random act of loving kindness and connection between two people and what they both seek as meaning in life and what they do for and with each other. That to me is as important as the politics.
Right.
And yet also I would say that her example of someone who does something without understanding its consequences and then walks it like she talks it and takes it to the end was particularly inspiring in terms of activism.
Yeah. So Laura Dern is the only name actor in this. Could have gone a different way.
Sure.
Right? You've worked with, over your career, Matt Damon, first film, Courage Under Fire, Leonardo DiCaprio, Tom Cruise, Denzel Washington 3 times that I can count, right?
Yeah.
You've worked with extraordinary actors, big name actors, the biggest name actors. Jack O'Connell is an actor who I'd never even heard of.
But to be fair, those of us who really follow this probably had. I mean, he made a couple of wonderful movies in England.
Right.
That I had seen.
But the average person who walks into the theater is going to see this guy and go, I have no idea this guy. They're going to know Laura Dern.
But I think that helps the movie.
Oh, it does. Well, I agree with you.
Right.
If, like me, they love The Deuce, the HBO series, they're going to recognize Emily Mead, who plays his wife. They're going to recognize Chris Coy, who plays the guard on death row.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to recognize, under all that facial hair, playing the arson investigator Hearst, they're going to recognize Jeff Perry from Scandal.
Yeah.
But the reality is this is a film where you mostly don't think of these people as actors playing roles. They kind of disappear. And to her credit, actually, Laura Dern disappears.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, it's if Laura was ever a known secret, the secret's out. And her work is always so extraordinary. But to me, what I see in this is a remarkable willingness to be simple and as to shed anything of attitude or anything of sort of presentation.
Right.
And it's a very, very informed performance by her relationship with Elizabeth, whom she came to know, and whose spirit sort of vibrated back and forth between the two of them, because Laura too has been very involved with activist causes, and I think that really informed the performance.
So I want to go to the audience for questions, but I'm never going to have the opportunity, maybe I'll have the opportunity again, to sit across from Ed Zwick. Why did you kill Gary on 30-something?
This audience is too young to even know what you're talking about. They have no idea.
And don't you regret it, and shouldn't you have not done it, and would you like to apologize to me?
I think we began a trend that was brought to its epitome last night by Game of Thrones, in which they're just going to kill everybody.
I could not see a damn thing. The whole episode was so dark I had to turn off all the lights in my house. All these years later, I'm still pissed about Gary.
First of all, I just want to thank you for really exceptionally powerful film.
Thanks.
It was very current. So many of the people in the orbit of Todd, their lives develop and evolve amazingly on the screen. And I'm interested in what happens to them, particularly his death row, the guard, who clearly went through transformation.
You know,
Can you tell us about it?
the guard is based, it's really a composite because he wrote about several people and the guard's often changed over the years, but he formed a couple of important relationships. And it's also based on a guard that I met as I spent time in these prisons, a man who was one of the men to turn the knob, and they would alternate sometimes as to who actually did it, who could not stomach that any longer and who left his job and has become a very strong militant anti-death penalty advocate. And his odyssey I felt was very important. But another guard said something to me one night, and he said, "You have to understand that jailers also spend their life in prison." And I thought that it has been my experience often that proximity and some sort of common just ground, in this case the Dallas Cowboys, but that you can form alliances and that things will change among people as they recognize each other's humanity. And that's a similar theme, I think, to what happened with him and Liz.
Excellent. We're going to take a couple because it's late, but we're going to get a couple in. Ma'am, sir,
Ma'am, sir.
and then in the back.
Who's that?
Right here.
I'm just wondering, the woman in the diner that said, I want to get productive.
Uh-huh. Who was she? She, again, is, I mean, there's a certain amount of compression that you use often in terms of exposition. That was representative of a couple people who brought Elizabeth into the Texas Coalition to abolish the death penalty. Sir?
Did Todd talk about seeing his daughter in his jail cell, or was that an error of choice?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because the idea occurred to me at some early moment and I dismissed it, because I was trying to approximate what it feels like to sit alone for 5 minutes, or to sit alone for 5 hours, or to sit alone for 5 days, or 5 weeks, or 5 years, and where your mind goes, particularly in often a solitary situation. And then as I read Todd's letters, I realized he was often writing to and about his children in the present tense, and even drawing things for them for their birthdays and writing his poetry. And I just thought that this would be a way to evoke that process in him. Rather than doing it by letters, I could actually dramatize it. And, you know, I felt that some of the, if you will, magical realist touches when he visits her house or she goes in the prison, that might approximate what daydreams are like, not nightmares. With a lot of filmmakers, we've always talked about dreams, and we've done 1,000 different variations of them. But to try to understand how your mind works when you are alone with your mind. And that was the intention. And also
very effective.
Yeah.
Very effective as a matter of filmmaking technique. When he's in her house as she's kissing her kids goodbye to go to school.
Yeah.
Kind of works.
Well, and it's also a way of dramatizing that growing intimacy or that shared understanding of each other's lives.
Yeah, I love it. And the way back there, yes.
Yeah. When you're telling a dramatic retelling of that,
A little louder.
When you're telling a dramatic retelling of a true story, what kind of responsibility do you feel to the real people when you're kind of adding those dramatic flourishes for the purposes of cinema?
I mean, obviously you feel significant responsibility because you're never going to know all their words, and the behaviors are going to be a combination of, you know, the obligatories of drama as well as everything else. But that being said, I've often done stories about real people. When Elizabeth saw this, it was very difficult for her initially in terms of just her, what she called her PTSD, something she'd never quite addressed. Was very important in the process. She has since seen the movie now again in Telluride. She was with us when we premiered, and she's going to travel with us now to DC and New York.
Wow.
She considers it as really a very significant, having had a very significant role in her healing process, and she's actually gained some physical mastery that she even had not yet found, and she feels inspired by this.
I remember David Gran, Ed, reporting at one point that she had made some small recovery.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
from the initial diagnosis.
That's right.
That has in fact been the case.
Yeah, a little bit.
There was a question right there. Yes, hi.
Me?
Yes, please.
It's not a question, I just wanted to say that I know this, I should think of this as a political film, but really it's about empathy, and
Yeah.
I think I just feel like we're lacking it so much lately, and I just really appreciate what you like.
Yeah, well, I think when I think about this climate that we're all in, I think there's for some reason, a more profound sense of injustice. I think we all have had petty injustices in our lives when we were accused of taking your sister's, bicycle or stealing that candy from the store or whatever it was. But I think we feel a certain impotence ourselves at this moment, and I think that is also, in some sense, animating the notion of criminal justice reform as well.
Correct. It's gotten to be so bad that we've decided to put our differences aside.
A little bit.
It's sometimes don't waste a good crisis, right?
Right.
Let me take one more, right there, ma'am. Yes, please.
Also, I want to say thank you for making the film.
Thanks.
Did the process of making it help ameliorate the anger and rage that you felt? Does it
Oh, that's such a
continue
good
in some
question. I learned something very important late in life. It's when I was making Blood Diamond, and I went to Africa for the first time, and ended up going back and forth for several years. But the first time when you're confronted with the enormity of the situation, the tendency is to feel in this passivity, this almost like, almost a very narcissistic kind of self-loathing, and I remember somebody who was working for the UNHCR turning to me and saying, "Get over yourself, do something." And the minute you do anything, no matter what it is, how small, and you engage, all of that self-absorption goes away, because you are, in fact, now, on the side of the angels, and you're doing something, and that sense of efficacy, I think, ennobles you. And I think, definitely, look, I could send the check to the Innocence Project. That would be fine. But I could make a film. And the fact that it took what it took to make it never felt like anything but a pleasure.
You're a great artist.
Yes.
And a great
Thank you so much. Please, if you're so inclined, austinfilm.org. Support this great institution, the Austin Film Society. If you have any left over, texastribune.org. We appreciate you coming out so much.
Just want to let you know that Elizabeth Gilbert is watching this on Facebook, and she can hear you right now.